playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called persuasion.
They're the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
What does rich mean?
Stories and wisdom.
Welcome to the Stories and Wisdom podcast, where we explore the real stories behind leadership and turning points that shape how people grow. I'm your host, Pradeep U.N., and today's guest is someone whose work has helped millions of people shift how they think about success, effort, and getting better at what they care about. Eduardo Brasinho is the co-founder of the Mindset Works, a renowned speaker, and the author of The Performance Paradox, a book that has really changed how I think about the tension between learning and performing. Eduardo, I'm so glad you're here. And to start us off, when someone meets you outside of work, how do you usually describe what you do?
Well, first, it's great to be here with you, Pradeep. So really life-giving. Depends on who the person is. Depends on, are they in the business world? But I might say I help organizations build cultures of learning, or I'm a public speaker. I work at internal corporate events. Those are some of the ways that I answer that question.
So we have 4 segments in this. With our first segment, it's called Memoir Moments. So let's start with a memory. Was there an early experience that helped for reframe what growth actually felt to you, not just intellectually, but in your bones, that set you on your current path?
Yeah, there are several moments in my life where that were really transformational. One of them was where my body broke down. I thought about growth and learning more as performative, as when I started going to school, I would just need to get good grades and try to get into a good university and then try to get a good job. And it was all about getting the marks and achieving. And in doing that, and in just kind of seeing that all as a sprint rather than a marathon, and not really being connected with something that I was passionate about and that I thought was worthwhile and that really improved people's lives and that was a joy to do, I really ran my body down. I got a pretty intense repetitive strain injury where I started losing the ability to use my hands. It became really painful to brush my teeth or to open doors or to drive. And I was fine with pain. I was very comfortable with sacrifice, but I got really scared when I met somebody with my same condition and she couldn't use her hands for more than 10 minutes a day. And I was only 27 years old. I didn't know what I could do without my hands at that time. And so it led me to reevaluate my life, because I realized, okay, I can't take my hands for granted. I can't take my ability to do things for granted. And I feel like what I'm doing is not really making a difference, because at the time I was working in venture capital, there was a ton of capital in the industry. I didn't have a lot of experience other than just working on spreadsheets and presentations. And so I just felt inauthentic, and that what I was doing wasn't really making a dent, because if I didn't do it, somebody else was going to do it. So I went to grad school to figure out what I could do that really brought meaning to me. And I also learned a lot about health and about my life and spirituality. And I had to go on a big journey to change lots of things. But that has certainly reconnected me with the importance of doing things that I am passionate about, that I think are worthwhile and that are a joy to do as I'm doing them, not just with the objective of getting good marks and then achieving some extrinsic reward.
When you're actually sharing your story, that I can also reflect, that's how I was as well. And I want to ask you, has that changed the way you parent your kids? Because, I feel like I'm doing the same mistakes as I didn't want to do in terms of I'm putting them on a sprint, but I'm that feels like the right thing to do in terms of helping them achieve. So I'm asking also as a father in terms of parenting advice, I guess.
Well, hats off to you for parenting. And I'm sure you and your partner bring your whole selves to that amazing task of parenting. That is a daunting task that my wife and I decided not to do because it was too daunting for us. We couldn't even take care of ourselves. It was too big a task for us. And we never felt the emotional draw to really transform our lives so much and give so much sacrifice to what you're doing. Because I had such a performative experience in school and in university, I think I would parent very differently than the experience I had as a child. I think I would actually consider something like unschooling, where I'm really promoting the child's natural curiosity from the beginning and just leading the child to explore and to grow the things that they're interested in, and through making contributions to other people, not in school. Because I think in school, most schools, there are lots of different kinds of schools. There are wonderful schools, there are wonderful teachers, but in general, a lot of the system just tries to feed things to kids that they're not interested in. And so what happened to me is I started to associate learning with things that were not fun, they were not relevant, they were not useful, and they were a drag. And that's the opposite of what learning is, what I reconnected with. That's one thing that I would love to see, if a child has that curiosity and drive to explore the world and to discover. And if they do, then support that, right? And let them grow. And I think they're going to grow a lot more than in the common structure. If they're not, like if that's not working for them, then I'll try something different. Maybe I'll try taking them to school or doing something else.
You're actually bringing it up in the context of child who can actually interested and then focus on that interest. I think that's the part we're still working with our daughters on. But let's move on to the next segment. The next segment is called Decision Do-Over. Knowing you for a few years now, I know there's some fabulous body of work and achievements that you've had, like going to Stanford, working on growth mindset that has been a core of many cultures in very large organizations that you helped transform, even writing some great bestseller books that I've read and leveraged in my life as well. But the question that I have, given all of that, like when you achieved something substantial, have you felt misaligned once you got there? And if you're going to look back at that kind of decisions that led you to there, are there any do-overs that you would do?
Yeah, sure. So first, I love the question. And just to reflect a little bit on the question, there's a dual intention there and a paradox of when I look back at some decisions that I would do differently. I definitely, with the new kind of understanding that I have now, if I were in those situations, I would make different decisions, and I can talk about some of those examples. On the other hand, it is my experiences and those decisions that brought me to this point, and I'm very happy and fulfilled with the life that I have now. And I don't know if I would have this life if I hadn't made those different choices and those difficult situations that I got myself into and learned through the school of hard knocks. I don't know if I would have learned the lessons as deeply. So there's that paradox of I'm grateful for having made wrong decisions in a way and learned from them. And yet, if I could go back, I would try to make better decisions. But when I went to University of Pennsylvania, my biggest objective looking back was social status, having a sense of belonging to a group of people that seemed to have it together. And to me, in my mental model and the way I saw people at the time, the people who seemed to have it more together were the most social, have high status, which tend to be more into like parties and things like that. And looking back, we're more interesting and we're working on really cool projects, both to learn and to contribute. And I have met some of those people that went to the University of Pennsylvania and other universities that I hear about their university experience and I see their community and their network. And I'm like, wow, like if I could do university again, I would seek different social relationships. And I would make so much better advantage of the learning experiences. So that's one. Another one is when I started being an entrepreneur, I was working with Carol Dweck on growth mindset. I was very clear that we were all about learning, but I over-indexed on learning by doing and just figuring things out along the way by working really hard and doing experiments. What I didn't do enough of is really engaged with people who had done things before and learned a lot of useful things that could mentor me and that I could learn from. And that's something else that I would go back and do differently.
Yeah, thank you. Again, those are two very strong points that you actually raised. And then leveraging a circle of mentors is always a great way for us to grow. Our next segment is called Puzzle Points. Where do you find it hardest to practice what you preach? And you can use this with the books that you had, like in the Performance Paradox, especially when it's coming to staying in the learning zone. Where do you find it hardest? Where do your readers and then the people that you consult or companies that engage with, where do they find it hardest in this?
Sure. So some things that I'm working on. First, I'm in a long journey to inspire a world of learners, but also like make it very practical. So growth mindset is really, really powerful. It's really, really important. It is the belief that we can change. And my work focuses on how to change, because you need the belief of how to change, but you also need to know how to change and to build those systems and habits to change and improve over time, right? And so the frameworks of learning zone and performance zone are to distinguish effort to get things done and execute, which is perform. But if the paradox is that if we put all our effort into performing, our performance suffers. In order to improve our performance, we need to do something different than perform, which is to engage in what we don't know, try new things, things that might or might not work. And that's called the learning zone. So that's a quest to make things more practical and actionable. And I'm continuing to go down that path for organizations. And so I am expanding my engagements from keynotes and workshops to then follow up kind of behavior change systems and really a cultural transformation partnership. And there's a lot of things that are super exciting and that I'm learning a ton and like have a great kind of community of people that I'm learning from and collaborating with. So that's one. Something else I'm working with that comes to mind. One is when it comes to learning, I feel a tension between proactively learning and strategically learning and reactively and responsively learning. And I tend to over-index on deep work and being strategic and blocking my time to do things that are high priority. And that's, I think, really valuable. But I also grapple with and wonder, like, for example, I don't engage a lot in LinkedIn. And I hear from people that they would like for me to be more engaged in LinkedIn. And I think for me, it would be helpful to be in community in LinkedIn and also be exposed to things that maybe were not in my priority list, but that are really interesting and expand my range, right? Like as David Epstein says, which I'm a big fan of. And so I'm kind of grappling with that tension. It's like a yin yang, right? Of like, we need to keep these things in harmony, just like the learning zone, the performance zone are things we need to keep in harmony. I think we also need to keep in harmony our proactive learning and responsive learning. And that's also something that I'm kind of grappling with. And so I think similarly to delegation, I love quality rather than quantity. I prefer to do fewer things in a really high quality way. And yet there's growth in impact and growth in general in figuring out how can I grow my impact. And maybe that might involve doing more and pushing myself to delegate more in more things. And so those are kind of tensions that I grapple with and work on.
The learning seems to happen when you slow things down, don't you? Like compared to when you're performing, you're adding numbers and then you're trying to do a lot more. And that is one part of the paradox in especially in companies when it's like do more with less resources or do it faster. Whereas learning comes from you need to reflect and you need to give the time and space to reflect. And the rest of the answers in how you're thinking about it is quality over quantity. And in a lot of other cases where I've been in large companies where it tends to be like, let's get that KPI done and move faster. And if the quality suffers a bit, that's okay. Is that something that you've seen a lot? And how do you actually help people overcome that hump?
Sure. So I think of it as a balance or a harmony or a point where you can be either too slow or too fast, right? Just like, for example, when we think about stress, for example, and how much stress is going to help us perform and learn, too much stress is going to prevent us from learning and listening, but too little stress is not going to push us enough to actually take on challenges and try to actually make an impact and learn from those things. So similarly, if we are just trying to get things done and maximize our immediate results, and it's just about the results, then that's going to push us to only do the things that we know how to do and try to make no mistakes. And then we're not going to have very little to learn. And even if we make mistakes, to your point, if we don't reflect, and then we're not going to extract those lessons from those mistakes. And if we do extract the lessons from the mistakes, we need to usually like put that in some sort of system to remind ourselves and to like keep ourselves accountable to actually take action on our insights. So to your point, I do think often for most of us, we over-index on just performing and just trying to get as much things done as possible and maximize the immediate reward, the immediate gratification at the expense of the investment in growth and future results. And so to your point, I do think that in general, it does involve injecting more reflection and more putting in systems to keep ourselves accountable to the insights that we gain. And that involves a slight decrease on the immediate results in the benefit of the future results. But at the same time, it is really about what helps the companies that I serve the most and the professionals that I serve the most is a lot of people see learning as something that happens in a classroom, even in an organization, right? Learning is about taking a course. And that's not very helpful. The biggest opportunity is to embed learning into the flow of work. so that our weekly meetings into our systems or structures, our weekly meetings, if they all have only performance zone topics, then embed some learning zone topics in there. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, right? Or have a weekly reflection, or make sure that we are trying new ways of working, or being curious and asking questions to our customers to be more customer centric, to generate more insights and more ways of better serving them. And those are all things that don't have to take a lot of time. They do take a little bit of time, but it's more about shifting the way we work than putting a lot of time into those things. And so for what's most helpful for the organizations I serve is first shifting the mental models, right? The understanding of all this hard work that we're putting into things. Is there a different way that we can direct our effort so that we are getting more done, right? Learning more and improving our performance over time. That part of that is mindset, right? It's the understanding that we can change and we can drive our own change. But then it's also like getting to the very practical strategies and how do we change our systems so that it changes the default way of working rather than it relying on willpower or people remembering to engage in the learning zone. No, we want to change the way things are done so that it becomes the easy default.
That actually sounds like a really good thing to do as an organization. And then the question that I'm trying to get to is, does this work in an organization as a group? Because the learning for individuals, they're all at different paths, but then the work is getting done as a group, usually even multidisciplinary work. And when you start combining individual journeys and multidisciplinary aspects for an outcome, how are you bringing all of this together? And I'll pause that question and then say, like, this, I think, would be a thought that I'd want to lead into our next segment, which is vision venture about what's on the horizon. The answers that you gave in the past, now when you're starting to bring that as an organization in a multidisciplinary way where individuals have multiple journeys, how are you bringing this together for the future version of themselves and the organization? How is that happening?
You answered your question absolutely. And I think you experienced this at Microsoft, I believe, which Microsoft has done a fantastic work at transforming their culture at the cultural level, the organizational level. And as they say, the transformation is never complete. It's always continuing. They're always continuing to improve, just like a growth mindset organization would. But absolutely, organizations can evolve or transform their culture. Well, that's where it's most effective because any individual can decide to do this effectively and build individual learning zone habits. But when you do it in community with the people that you work with or that you live with, then you're so much more effective because there's so many benefits to it. One is that you're reminding each other of this intention and the way that you live and work all the time, just through your behavior, and not only modeling the behavior, but doing so explicitly so that this is part of the language, this is part of what we're appreciating about each other, this is part of what we're explicitly talking about. But then we learn so much more because there are more brains engaged in thinking about things, in sharing information, in sharing different perspectives. So we therefore learn and grow faster, and we grow our performance faster as well. So this usually happens at the top level of an organization. If it's being done at the organizational level, it's something that the CEO needs to be excited about, right? Like at Microsoft, Satya Nadella was like the number one champion for transforming and creating a growth mindset culture. But obviously, Kathleen Hogan and other executives were there too. And that's really critical because they are the ones who determine the priorities for the organization. They are the ones who are going to be modeling, what it means to be successful in this organization. They're the ones who are going to make decisions about what you're going to be investing in. And if you want to transform a culture, you need to make investments and to really show commitment in the way that you behave. And so that involves doing some work with the executive team, or sometimes it's like 300 people in a room, the top leaders, where the executives are working alongside the other senior leaders in the organization, and they're going through a journey at the same time. So it can happen in different ways. But through that space, often it involves a lot of facilitation. So some injection, right, of new frameworks, new ways of thinking and inspiration, but then a lot of facilitation with those seeds and with those catalysts for people to respond to some questions, talk to each other, share out and really reflect on what this could look like for the organization. So to your second question, I think part of the process involves developing a clear vision of what kind of culture does this look like in the future? What are we driving towards? What is this inspiring, life-giving environment that we're creating together? And then planning for how we can get there in small and big ways and creating the structures to make progress along the way. And so, planning, putting accountability, structures, putting structures to form new habits, to give and receive feedback is a journey that takes a long time, but it is like super fulfilling to go through it.
Oh, awesome. You already talked about several ideas that you're working on. If you're building a dream team for your next big chapter, what kind of people archetypes, tribes are you actually bringing on board? And is it the same as before, or is it a new set of one? How are you thinking through that in your vision venture?
Well, I think diversity is really important. Diversity of skills, diversity of ways of thinking, diversity of experiences and perspective, because that makes the team wiser and be able to bring more information in and make better decisions. I think one difference between now and when I was first an entrepreneur is when I was an entrepreneur, what I almost cared almost solely about was passion and purpose to the mission, like being really excited about the mission that we were on to create a learning-oriented world. And we were focused on doing that in schools at the time. And that was great. But to my earlier point, we were trying to learn and figure things out and discover everything. And that just takes a very long time. And so a big difference in the approach I'm taking now is that purpose and mission is really important still. And I think that I can better attract those people because I have more credibility now. But then it's also really important to bring expertise, like existing expertise. Obviously, people who know that everybody can always continue to improve. We're never going to be finished products in knowing everything about anything. But people who have learned a lot of things are really competent and they have developed the expertise and always they're continuing to improve. And that, I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you, Eduardo. I mean, this has been a generous and grounding conversation, and thank you for your time. You helped name a lot of things that many of us feel. I've definitely experienced, but then to actually bring it into structure and then have a talk about it in a way in which we can make sense of it and plan and organize is very helpful. But it's also genius work because simplifying things which are complex and chaotic takes a lot of work, thinking, and structure. So thank you for all of that. For folks who want to explore more of your work, where should they go?
Well, I'm trying to become more active on LinkedIn. I do post and I'm going to be more active. I have a monthly newsletter, which if people want to continue learning about growth mindset in the learning zone, it's on my website, briceño.com. That's my last name, BRICENO.com. And there's some resources there that people can download. And my book is called The Performance Paradox.
Excellent. And thank you again for being here. And for our listeners, we'll see you next time on the Stories and Wisdom podcast. Thank you.
It's great to be with you, Pradeep. Thank you. And thank you for all you do. It's just always a pleasure to talk to you.
Playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called persuasion.
They're the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
Real deep pink.
That was a very different level of inequity.
What does rich mean?